Hello, I'm ANEKA from Made to Sew and welcome to my buttonhole series. This video is all about the automatic buttonhole. I'm going to be showing you two different sewing machines and how the automatic buttonhole differs on these machines. Now, when you are doing an automatic buttonhole, just remember that the sewing machine might stitch away from you. It might start and stitch towards you. Just something to think about because sewing machines do differ with this, and I don't want you to put your fabric underneath and the sewing machine to sew in the wrong direction. I would always recommend that you test your buttonholes before doing the final one. So grab some scrap fabric and let's have a go. This is an example of the buttonhole that we're going to be doing in this tutorial using the automatic buttonhole feature. I'm going to be showing you the automatic buttonhole on two different machines. You will find that the feet differ, the method is slightly different, and they actually sew the buttonhole in a slightly different direction. Start by grabbing your automatic buttonhole foot. This foot here is foot 3A, which is the Bernina automatic buttonhole foot. And this foot is what you might find on some other machines. This was for my Husqvarna, and this is the automatic buttonhole foot. Now, this is the front of the foot and this is the back, and I can open this section to position in a button. And that is how the machine will work out the size of the buttonhole that I'm doing. I'm going to show you both methods on both machines. This is the bobbin for my Bernina sewing machine. The manual actually suggests that I take the bobbin thread and I thread it through the tiny little hole at the end of this arm here. What this will do is it will create a slightly tighter tension on the bobbin. It will give the threads on the right side of the bobbin a slightly more rounded appearance, which in turn can look more attractive. So it's definitely worth giving it a try depending on the thread and fabric that you're working with. I'm going to begin by positioning on the buttonhole foot. And this is the automatic buttonhole foot for this sewing machine. I would like this top thread to be below the foot, so I'm going to hold on to my needle thread, turn the hand wheel towards me so the needle goes all the way down and then all the way back up. And then I'm going to collect that with snips or scissors underneath. Just like so. You want both threads to be underneath the foot. You may have a needle up and needle down button, which you can also use for that. Choose the buttonhole stitch. Mine for a standard automatic buttonhole is 0. And then I've already prepared my piece of fabric. And I have got a little bit of stabilizer behind this, and I have drawn on the size of the buttonhole that I want to create. Now, with the Bernina automatic buttonhole, I need to create one buttonhole first to check the size, and then all of the rest of the buttonholes will be this correct size. So I like to draw my first buttonhole with a starting point and an end point, so 2 horizontal lines and 1 vertical line. If you want to learn more about how to stabilize your buttonhole, how to draw it, what size to draw, then I do recommend that you watch my Introduction to Buttonholes video first. I'll pop a link to it here. Now we're going to position this underneath, and the first thing we're going to want to do is to make sure that the vertical line and the horizontal line is in the right place. So on my foot I have a little red mark on the left that is in line with the 0. So I've got a bit of a measurement gauge up the left hand side here. I need to make sure when I position my foot down that the red line is in line with my horizontal line at the start of my buttonhole. So you really do need to get close in here to have a look. The needle is in the center on this machine, so I'm going to want to position the needle into the fabric, turn the hand wheel towards you, and I would recommend using the hand wheel rather than pressing the needle up or down button here, because what I'm doing is checking that the needle is going to go in on my vertical line. So it may take a little bit of maneuvering to make sure that your buttonhole is in the right place. And this bit is really important because if you do not start sewing the buttonhole in the right place, then it's not going to be in the right place. So needle on this machine needs to be where the center and the horizontal line meet. And the horizontal line should be in line with the little red dot on the side here. Now you do have a little red dial or gauge that you can sort of move up and down, so you can move this to the size of your buttonhole if you desire. My practice one is going to be 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres long, so I could move that to 2.5 centimetres. Now I'm going to begin sewing, and it's going to sew the left hand side. Now with this machine I need to stop sewing when I get to the end of my buttonhole. So for the first buttonhole, I am telling it what size I want it to create. You can either use this little red marker on your sort of gauge on your measurements on the left hand side, or you can obviously use what you've drawn. When you're guiding your fabrics through the sewing machine, hold it nice and secure. You want the fabric to feed straight through the machine so that you're sewing alongside the straight vertical line. Now I'm going to stop when my needle is nearing the end of my buttonhole, so the last horizontal line. I can also see here that the little red mark that we used to start with on the plastic bit of the buttonhole that has moved towards us is now in line with the little red gauge. That's telling me that I'm at the end of my buttonhole. You can always use the hand wheel to turn the needle towards you, put it into the fabric, just double check that it is in the right place. If you're happy, on this sewing machine, I'm going to press my reverse button, which is up here. This then tells the machine that that is where I want the buttonhole to end. And when I continue sewing, it's now going to sew away from me. So it's going to then complete the second side of the buttonhole. It starts by finishing the start of the buttonhole horizontally, and then it continues sewing up the other side of the buttonhole, finally finishing the ends of the buttonhole. This machine will automatically come to a stop when it has finished sewing. Lift up your presser foot and take a look at your creation. As you can see, mine was spot on. My pink line is right down the middle of my buttonhole, and I'm really happy with that. The great thing about this machine is that once you have set the first buttonhole, it will then create all of the other buttonholes exactly the same. All you will then need to draw is the location of the buttonhole by a vertical line and the start point by a horizontal line. Line up the buttonhole just like you did with the first one, and then you can stitch away, and the machine should automatically create you a buttonhole exactly the same size. I would recommend that you sew all of your buttonholes at a moderate speed. If you sew them too quickly, they generally don't look as good. And I would also recommend that you sew each of the buttonholes for the same garment at a similar speed if you can, because again, you want them to all look the same. Feel free to have a play with the length and the width of the stitches, depending on the fabric that you are using. And there you can see it automatically turns around for me. I didn't even need to prompt it. It knew the size that it needed to be. To finish the buttonholes, you're going to want to trim the threads. You can simply cut close to the finished stitching because generally they're quite secure. But if you're worried about them, then I would take the threads on the right side of the fabric and thread a needle. This is again where I generally use these easy to thread needles because it's just quick and easy. I'll then position that through the buttonhole, taking the thread through to the wrong side, just like so. Turn the work over and knot the two threads together. Feel free to rethread the needle and thread the thread up the back of the stitching if you want to, but pretty much it's going to be secure. There we go. Trim that away, just like so. Then you can simply tear away and you're ready to cut open your buttonholes. Please take a look at my introduction to buttonholes, and I show you a couple of different methods for opening the buttonholes and securing them for a nice professional finish. If you wish to change the size of the buttonhole that your machine is making, you will now need to press the clear button here, and that will reset the buttonhole stitch so that you again need to inform it of the size when you're creating the first buttonhole. Feel free to have a play by adjusting the width and length of the stitch. So these were the standard buttonholes with preset width and length on my sewing machine. The preset width is 4.5 millimeters and a length of 0.5 millimeters. Feel free to play with the width of the stitch and the length of the stitches if required, depending on the fabric that you're using. I would recommend that you test this. Now, I had a little play by increasing the length. So you can see here that the satin stitch, that is what is created by the bead on the side of the buttonhole, has longer spaces between the stitches of the zigzag, and it's more noticeable. I might use this on a thicker fabric or a stretch fabric. With this little buttonhole here, I have reduced the width. It's something that you might want to do on delicate fabrics, or if you're creating a very small buttonhole. On this machine, I need to choose the buttonhole on my stitch selector here. I need to choose the buttonhole on my length, which is about 0.5 millimeters. And on the width, I need to be between 4 and 5. Now, you may or may not have a width function on your sewing machine. Just make sure that you are doing what the manual suggests for the automatic buttonhole. Now, I've got my automatic buttonhole foot. I have opened the back and positioned in a button. I need to put that on. This can be a bit tricky. I generally say to people sort of angle the foot so that you can go underneath the white plastic bit, and then you just need to push back on this machine to position it on. Now, my top needle thread needs to go underneath the foot as well. So on this machine, I need to turn my hand wheel all the way so the needle goes all the way down and all the way back up. And then I will grab an unpicker or something, or a pin, just to get both of the threads, the bobbin and the needle, underneath the foot and out of the way, towards the back or side of the machine. Now, I've set up my buttonhole ready to go. I'm using the buttonhole stitch, a stitch width of between 4 or 5, which was what my machine recommended, and a length of buttonhole, which is 0.5 millimeters. Before you begin, you must remember to pull down the buttonhole guide. This is easy to forget. It's a little white plastic thing right there. And this is how the machine knows when you need to turn around based on the size of the button in the back of the automatic buttonhole foot. Collect your piece of fabric, and I would always recommend doing a test buttonhole before jumping in and doing the real thing. I'm positioning a piece of stabilizer behind this, and with this machine, you actually only need to draw a central line and a starting point, because the button at the back of the automatic buttonhole foot is going to dictate the size of the buttonhole. Now, this machine actually starts, sews away from us, sews at the end of the buttonhole, sews towards us, and then finishes the end. So it needs to go in the opposite way. Now, this vertical line here needs to line up with, there's a little vertical line on the front of the foot, and there's also a bit of a sort of bat wing shape of the piece of plastic that sits below the needle. So that's got to line up with the vertical line. Now, the needle does not start quite in the center, it starts on the left-hand side. So the needle needs to go in on the horizontal line, but it will not be at the join of the horizontal and vertical lines. It's going to be just off to the left. Again, I tend to turn the hand wheel, position the needle into the fabric, and get everything sort of lined up. Then I'll put my foot down, check I'm happy with it. I also take a look at the back of the machine and make sure that that central line of the buttonhole is coming through the foot centrally and it looks like it's straight. Once you have everything lined up ready to go, you can begin. And this machine is going to sew a horizontal stitch first for the start of the buttonhole. Then it's going to sew up one side of the buttonhole. It will sew across the top of the buttonhole. It will return to the beginning, and then you'll need to stop sewing. Again, you're going to want to keep it relatively slow. You don't want to go too quickly so that the stitches formed neatly. The machine will automatically turn around when this little buttonhole guide hits the end of the foot. That's based on the size of the foot. Just guide the fabric through the sewing machine. No need to push or pull here. Now, with this machine, you will need to stop sewing when the machine gets back to the start. Allow the machine to sew over itself a couple of times and then stop sewing. Don't allow the machine to create a build-up of thread here. So be cautious at the end. And there you have your buttonhole stitch. On this machine, to complete the next buttonhole stitch, you must make sure you restart or reset the buttonhole. Turn the stitch dial to the left to the reset button and back to the buttonhole button. You should hear a click. This means the machine has been reset and the machine will remember to restart from the beginning when it sews your stitch. And again, with the button in the back of the buttonhole foot, it will sew the right size for you. Feel free to have a play with the stitch length dial. You can move your stitch length dial closer to 0. This will create a closer length with your stitches. They will look more uniform. However, you need to make sure that you're not too close to 0 and that the fabric is actually moving through your sewing machine. It's always best to test it first. Trim the threads as before. Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you now feel confident about doing automatic buttonholes on your sewing machine.